There are some things you can't explain. A feeling that sits in your chest like a stone, heavy and cold, that tells you something is wrong before your mind can catch up. I've lived long enough to know that feeling. 63 years on this earth, most of them spent in the Waikato, watching the seasons turn over the same green hills my father farmed before me. I know what it means when the air changes before a storm, and I know what it means when something shifts in a room that looks perfectly ordinary from the outside. That Sunday started like any other. My son had been seeing his fiancée for nearly 2 years, and we were finally meeting her family properly, over a meal. The way things should be done. I'd put on my good shirt. My wife had baked a pavlova the night before, because that's what she does when she wants to make a good impression. We drove down to Hamilton, parked outside a restaurant on Victoria Street, and I told myself the stone in my chest was just nerves. It wasn't nerves. My son's name is Callum. He's 31, works in logistics, has his mother's eyes and my stubbornness. I won't pretend he and I have always seen eye to eye. There were years when the distance between us felt wider than the Tasman, but somewhere in his late 20s, he came back to us. And I was grateful for that in the way you're only grateful for things you almost lost. When he called to tell us he was getting married, I heard something in his voice I hadn't heard in a long time. He sounded settled, certain. Her name was Petra. I'm not going to say she was unpleasant, because she wasn't. She was polished. That's the word. Everything about her was smooth, and considered her smile, her laugh, the way she turned questions back to you, so you ended up talking about yourself without meaning to. She had a quality that I think some people would call charm, and other people would call something else entirely, depending on how long they'd been in the room with her. Her mother, Sylvia, was there, and her brother, Marcus, and an uncle whose name I never properly caught, who spent most of the meal looking at his phone. We sat down. Wine was poured. My wife started talking to Sylvia about the wedding venue they'd chosen, a place out near Raglan, a converted barn on a property that Petra's family apparently owned, or had access to. The details were always slightly vague when that property came up. I watched Callum. He was attentive, happy, refilling glasses, laughing at the right moments. He looked like a man who'd decided something and felt good about it. So why couldn't I let that be enough? I kept watching Marcus. He was maybe 35, dark-haired, pleasant enough on the surface. But twice during the meal I caught him and Sylvia exchanging a look, not a warm look, not the kind families share when they're happy and slightly embarrassed by it. A look with calculation in it. A look that lasted just a fraction too long and carried something unspoken across the table like a note being passed. I told myself I was imagining it. About 40 minutes into the meal, Callum's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, apologized, and stepped outside to take the call. Something to do with a consignment that had gone wrong over the weekend. He'd mentioned it in the car on the way down. He was only going to be a few minutes. That was when it happened. I'd excused myself to find the bathroom, which was toward the back of the restaurant, past a small bar area with leather stools and low lighting. On my way back, a woman stopped me. She was perhaps 70, small and thin in the way of someone who'd once been taller, white hair cut short, wearing a pale green cardigan over a floral blouse. She had the look of someone's grandmother, which is perhaps why I stopped. She put her hand on my arm. Her grip was firmer than I expected. "You're with the young couple at the corner table," she said. It wasn't a question. "My son," I said. "Yes." She looked over my shoulder once, quickly, then back at me. She pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand and closed my fingers around it. Her eyes were very clear and very serious. "Don't open that here," she said. "And please get your son away from that family. Tonight." Then she walked past me, through the bar area, and out a side door that led onto the street. I stood there with the paper in my fist. By the time I got back to the table, my face must have been doing something unusual, because my wife looked at me with that particular expression she has, the one that asks a question without using words. I shook my head slightly. Not now. I sat down. I poured myself some water. I asked Sylvia something about the Raglan property, some innocuous question about whether they'd owned it long, and I listened to her answer with the part of my brain that handles conversation on autopilot, while the rest of me sat very still and thought about the woman in the cardigan. Callum came back. He squeezed Petra's hand. The meal continued. I excused myself again after the main course, went to the bathroom, and unfolded the piece of paper. It had a name on it, and a New Zealand company's office registration number. And below that, handwritten in careful, small letters, search this. Look at the directorships. Look at what happened to the company registered at the Raglan property address. There are people who lost everything. Your son is next. I stared at it for a long time in that small bathroom with the hum of the ventilation fan above me. Then I folded it, put it in my shirt pocket, and went back to the table and finished the meal. I have spent a long time being the kind of man who doesn't make a scene, who thinks before he speaks, who understands that accusations require evidence, and that love, even protective love, can become a weapon if you're not careful with it. So I smiled. I helped carry the pavlova dish back to the car. I shook Marcus's hand and said it had been lovely to meet him. I watched Petra kiss my son on the cheek in the car park, and I waited. Callum and Petra were driving back to Auckland that night. My wife and I were staying at my sister's place in Chartwell. In the car, I told my wife about the woman and the note. I told her calmly, the way you have to tell someone something that might frighten them. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Show me." I handed her the note. She read it twice under the interior light. "We need to look this up tonight," she said. My sister's place was quiet when we arrived. She was already asleep. We sat at her kitchen table with my wife's laptop, and we searched the company registration number. The company name that came up was Harrington Coastal Properties Limited. The registered address was the Raglan property. The directors listed were Sylvia Harrington and Marcus Harrington. That much I'd half expected. But then my wife clicked through to the filing history, and we saw that the company had been placed into liquidation 14 months earlier. We looked at the liquidator's report. There were 11 creditors listed. Private individuals, all of them. People who had invested money in some cases, substantial money, amounts that would represent years of savings into what appeared to be a rural tourism development on the Raglan property. A converted barn, accommodation pods, an events venue, the same venue Callum and Petra had booked for their wedding. The total amount owed to creditors was listed at just over $400,000. None of it had been recovered. The liquidator's report noted that the assets of the company, including the Raglan property itself, were found to be held in a separate trust structure, placing them beyond reach of the liquidation. I sat back in my chair. My wife's hand found my arm. "They're doing it again," she said quietly. "A new company, a new property, and Callum. Callum has savings," I said. "He told me last month he'd been putting money aside for a deposit on a house. He said Petra had suggested they pool their finances before the wedding. Start fresh as a couple." We looked at each other across my sister's kitchen table at nearly midnight. I picked up my phone and called my son. He didn't answer. It was late. He was probably driving or already home. I left a message. I tried to keep my voice level. I said it was important and to call me back as soon as he could, no matter the time. Then I sat there and thought about what I knew and what I didn't know. I knew the company had collapsed and left 11 people without their money. I knew the Raglan property was still apparently in use despite the liquidation. I knew that Petra had encouraged Callum to combine their finances. I didn't know who the woman in the cardigan was. I didn't know how she knew who I was or what she knew about this family. I didn't know whether what I was looking at was criminal or merely the particular kind of reckless that stops just short of a courtroom. But I knew the feeling in my chest. And it was no longer a stone. It was something sharper. Callum called back at 12:40 in the morning. He was home. Petra was there. I asked if I could speak to him privately, and I heard him move footsteps. A door closing. "Dad, what's going on?" I told him. I told him all of it. The woman, the note, the company registration, the liquidation, the creditors, the $400,000, the 11 people. I read him the details slowly so he could write them down if he wanted to. There was a very long silence. "She's right here," he said. His voice was different, flattened. "I know," I said. "I'm not asking you to do anything tonight. I'm asking you not to transfer any money anywhere until we've talked to a lawyer. Can you do that?" Another silence. "Dad, are you sure about this? Like, are you sure you're not?" "I'm not," I said. "I know how this sounds. I know you're going to be angry with me. That's all right. Just don't move any money." He said he wouldn't. He said he needed to think. He said he'd call me in the morning. He hung up. I didn't sleep. At 7 the next morning, Callum called back. Petra had left early, he said. Gone to her mother's. He'd been up most of the night on his computer. He'd found the same liquidation report. He'd found something else, too, a thread on a New Zealand consumer forum, posted 18 months ago, where 2 of the 11 creditors had shared their stories. They'd been approached through a mutual connection, invited to invest in a rural tourism project with a guaranteed return. They'd met Sylvia and Marcus at the Raglan property. They'd been charmed. They'd transferred money into the company account. One of them had lost $60,000. One of them had written, at the end of their post, "I still don't understand how people like this look you in the eye." Callum's voice, when he read that part aloud to me, was very quiet. "She wanted us to open a joint account this week," he said. I closed my eyes. "What do you want to do?" I asked him. "I want to go to the police," he said. We drove back up to Auckland that morning. My wife and I, along the motorway with the Waikato farmland rolling past and the sky very blue and wide the way it gets in late summer. We met Callum at his apartment. He looked like he hadn't slept, which he hadn't. He looked like someone who'd put their weight on something they'd trusted and felt it give way beneath them. I know that feeling. I've had it myself at different points in my life. It doesn't get easier to describe. We sat together and went through everything again. The note. Lokingnets, the note, the company records, the forum posts. We made a list of what we had. Then we drove to the police station. The officer we spoke to was calm and thorough. She took notes. She told us that fraud investigations take time, that what we had was significant, but that building a case required establishing intent and pattern. She noted that the previous company's collapse had been investigated, but that insufficient evidence had been found for criminal charges at that time. She said this new information, particularly if other former investors were willing to come forward, changed the picture. She asked us how we'd come to know about the company registration number. I told her about the woman in the cardigan. She looked at me steadily for a moment. "Can you describe her in more detail?" I described her. Age, height, the pale green cardigan, the short white hair, the side door she'd walked through, the firmness of her grip. The officer wrote it down without comment. Later, after we'd left, I found myself wondering how many people that woman had watched walk into that family's orbit before someone finally listened. Whether there had been others she'd tried to warn who hadn't stopped. Whether she was one of the 11 or knew one of them. Or was something else entirely a witness who had watched long enough and decided she couldn't keep watching. I never found out who she was. I looked. I went back to the restaurant 2 weeks later and spoke to the staff, described her, asked if anyone recognized her. Nobody did. She was not a regular. She had not made a booking. She had come in through that side entrance, done what she came to do, and left. Some people are like that. They appear at the exact moment they're needed, and when the moment has passed, they're gone. In the weeks that followed, things moved. Slowly at first, then faster. One of the creditors from the forum was contacted through the police properly and agreed to provide a formal statement. A second creditor came forward independently after local news ran a brief item about an investigation into a rural property scheme. The Raglan property was looked into, and it turned out the trust structure holding it had its own irregularities. Documents that didn't hold up to scrutiny. Signatures that raised questions. Sylvia and Marcus Harrington were each charged with obtaining by deception. Marcus was also charged with filing false company documents. The trial date was set for the following year. Petra, it emerged, had not been a director of any company. She was younger than her family's schemes and may or may not have known the full extent of what she was involved in. That is for a court to determine, not me. What I know is that she and Callum did not stay together. That conversation, whatever it contained, belonged to the two of them, and I won't reconstruct it here. What I will say is this. Callum came down to see us about 6 weeks after that Sunday. He arrived unannounced on a Saturday afternoon, knocked on the door, and when I opened it, he stood there on the porch for a moment without saying anything. He looked tired but clearer than he had, less like someone trying to hold a shape and more like himself. He said, "You should have pushed harder when you first felt it." I said, "You would have pushed back." He thought about that. "Yeah," he said, "probably." He came inside. We had tea. His mother made toasted sandwiches, and we sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours, talking about things that had nothing to do with any of it. The rugby, a leaking spouting I'd been meaning to fix, a documentary he'd watched about deep-sea fish. Normal things. The kind of conversation that is its own form of repair. Before he left, he said, "Who was she?" "The woman." "I don't know," I said. "Someone who'd been through it before," he said. "That's what I think," I said. He nodded. He stood up, put his jacket on. At the door, he turned back. "Thanks, Dad. There are things I've been turning over since then. Not just about what happened, but about all of it, about why it's so easy to mistake polish for substance and attention for care, and the performance of belonging for the thing itself." Petra's family had perfected a particular kind of warmth. The right restaurant, the right conversation, the flattery administered in exactly the right doses. They made people feel chosen. And being made to feel chosen is one of the most disarming things that can happen to a person, because it works on something very deep in us, the part that wants to be seen and valued and welcomed in. I don't think most people who get drawn into situations like this are foolish. I think they're human. I think the hunger to be accepted by people who seem to have something we want, warmth, belonging, a future that looks a certain way, that hunger makes us lower our guard in ways we wouldn't otherwise. And the people who understand how to exploit that are very skilled at looking like the thing you needed all along. The lesson, if there is one, is not to be suspicious of kindness. Kindness is real, and it's necessary, and the world depends on it. But there is a kind of smoothness that mimics warmth without containing it. And over time, not immediately, not on first meeting, but over time you can learn to feel the difference. It lives in the small things, whether people's stories are consistent, whether their generosity ever costs them anything, whether they ask questions because they want to know you or because they want to know what you have. And I will say this: trust what you feel in your chest. Not every heavy feeling means something, but when a feeling like that comes and sits and stays and won't be reasoned away, it is worth pausing long enough to ask why. An old man with 63 years behind him has learned a few things. One of them is this: the people who love you will forgive you for asking hard questions. The people who need you not to ask them, that tells you everything you need to know. Wherever that woman in the pale green cardigan is now, I hope she's well. I hope someone has done something kind for her that she wasn't expecting. I hope that somewhere in whatever carried her to that restaurant and into my path that Sunday afternoon, there is something like peace. Because of her, my son didn't lose his savings. Because of her, 11 people's story has a chance of becoming something other than a wound that never closed. Because of her, I sat across a kitchen table from my boy on a Saturday afternoon and talked about rugby and leaking spoutings and deep-sea fish, and it was ordinary and it was enough. Sometimes that's all we're trying to protect. The ordinary things, the afternoon tea and the table and the person sitting across from you. The life that's quiet enough to be lived in. Don't wait for someone to slip you a note. Pay attention. Ask questions. Trust your instincts. And never ever let someone make you feel that love requires silence.